How's everyone, Grant here, and welcome to my camera comparison between the Galaxy A53 5G and last year's model, the A52 5G. And so both these phones have the same camera specs, and they're pretty much very similar phones overall in hardware, except the newer A53 gives you a slightly larger battery and they take away the headphone jack. But the main difference is the chipsets. So last year's model had the Snapdragon 750 chipset, and this year Samsung has gone with their own Exynos chipset, and they said they've been able to improve the image processing even though they have the same camera hardware on the A53. So we're going to test these out and see if that's true. So let's take a look. And so as you just saw, the front cameras can't shoot 4K video, but it's not stabilized. So this is at 1080p to show you that stabilization. And so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and check out the actual photos and rest of the videos to see if Samsung's actually managed to improve the quality of them with the same camera hardware from last year. So this is a rear video test of the Galaxy A53 5G and A52 5G. As you can see, they are both recording from the rear-facing cameras. And this is the ultra-wide-angle cameras on each at 4K 30 frames per second. That's the max resolution and frame rate on them. There is no stabilization here at 4K on any of the cameras. To get that stabilization, you're going to have to turn on or move over to 1080p. So let's just pan around to give you a feel for side-by-side how these ultra-wide-angle cameras compare. And let's go ahead and move into the main lens now. Now 3, and then on the A52. And so same deal, I'll pan around here, give a feel for how it looks like in this particular setting. Again, the main cameras are not stabilized here at 4K, but I did want to give you a feel for what that looks like here. And if you pan over here to the right, we'll test out the zoom here in 4K. So we can move into, let's go to maybe a 4x zoom or so. Try to tap into that. 4x digital on the A53, and let's go to the same thing on the A52 here. And then they both go to a max 10 times digital, so let's tap into that on the A53, and then let's go and tap into that on the A52. So there's the max zoom here on each, 10 times digital on both. And so I'll come back at 1080p, we'll do the zoom test at that resolution and finish out the stabilization test. Alright, so we're back at full HD 1080p, and so let's go check out the zoom here at this resolution. So let's go to 4 times here on the A53, and let's go do the same thing here on the A52. Sometimes digital zoom can look different at different resolutions on some devices, so let's move into the max, still 10 times here at 1080p on the A53 and also on the A52. So that's what the max digital zoom here looks like at 1080p. Let's back these out here all the way back to 1 times. And then let's go ahead and test autofocus here on the post, first with the A53. So pretty snappy autofocus there, and refocus away, and one more time. So yeah, definitely snappy autofocus on the A53, and here on the A52 seems to be about the same, pretty snappy as well, and both decent amount of background blur or bokeh effect. And so let's go ahead and walk down the stairs. We'll test out the stabilization here at 1080p. Again, no stabilization at 4K. And let's go ahead and jog to try to stress that stabilization out here. And we'll pull up here and pan up into the afternoon sunlight so you can see how the exposure adjusts for that really bright light. So here's a low light video test between the Galaxy A53 5G and A52 5G. This is the ultra wide angle camera on each at 4K 30 frames per second. And at 4K, the cameras are not stabilized for video, not the ultra wide or the main camera. But I'm just going to pan around here to give you a feel for how these ultra wide angle cameras compare here side by side in this particular lighting situation. You can see how they do into that really bright street light over there. So let's go ahead and move into the main lens now on the A53 and A52. And so let's go ahead and just pan around so you can get a feel for how this main lens looks. And again, this is not stabilized at 4K either. You can see it flaring out that really bright street light. Not too badly considering how bright that is though. And it is overcast. That's the gray skies is really what it looks like. And so let's go ahead and stop the video. I'll come back with full HD 1080p and we'll do a stabilization test. Alright, we're back at 1080p 30 frames per second, and this video should now be stabilized. There is a bit more crop for the electronic stabilization, and they both can shoot at 60 frames per second, but again, that's not going to be stabilized here at 60 frames 1080p. So let's go ahead and pan this way, and we'll do that stabilization test so you can see how the stabilization is looking compared on each of these phones here at full HD 1080p on both phones. And we're going to go over from that pretty well lit situation to a much darker area like I was using, compare and contrast with good light and really low light. As you're around the corner, it's pretty dark around here. And the cameras are trying to brighten things up a little bit, but not as much as I would expect. There might be some noise, but not too bad. Pull up here and pan up into the sky. A bunch of wind just came up, so you might be hearing that in microphones. And again, you can see the clouds. It is very much overcast. We've had some cold weather lately. Let's go ahead and pan over here to the left, down this alleyway, which is dark and some mixed lighting with that light coming off the building there. So you can see how these phones are handling this particular lighting situation. So there is your low light test on both phones. And one last test, I'm back at 4K 30 frames per second. Just want to show you what it looks like here in this darker area at 4K, because sometimes 4K can look darker then 1080p. Again, there's a sky. You can see some focus hunting on both phones sometimes. And so we'll pan around this way so we can get a view of this particular scene and how both these phones are handling that with that darker lane with some of this light coming off the building there. So there's your 4K sample to compare to in low light. You saw the focus hunting there on the A52. So there you go, 4K low light test on both phones. So here's a low light test from the front facing cameras of the Galaxy A53 5G and A52 5G. This is at their max resolution and frame rate, which is 4K 30 frames per second, and it is not stabilized at this resolution. It is only stabilized at 1080p. So you're gonna get this wider field of view here, which is nice, but you're not gonna get any stabilization on this front facing camera at 4K. I'm starting out in my usual testing spot in some pretty good light, so you can see how these cameras can do with some pretty optimal light here. And so I'm gonna stop the video, come back at 1080p, and we'll do a little bit of stabilization test. All right, so we're back at 1080p 30 frames per second, and so you see more of a crop for that electronic stabilization. They can shoot at 60 frames per second at 1080p, but again, it won't be stabilized. So let's go ahead and start walking to test that stabilization and see what they look like here side by side. So if you notice any differences, if one is better than the other or not. And we're gonna be moving over to a darker area so you can see what it looks like in a more difficult light. I also have a water fountain off to my right, so we can test out the microphones and how they handle that background noise there. And we'll pan all the way around so you can see how these front cameras do into the really bright street lights behind me. And overall, not too bad. Maybe the A53 might be flaying it out just a bit more. But let's go back into this darker area so you can see what it looks like in a bit more tougher light here, side by side. And both phones are definitely brightening this up more than what I'm seeing with my own eyes. It's a bit darker in this area than these cameras are showing. So you might be seeing a bit more noise here in the picture. But that's going to do it for this camera comparison between the brand new Galaxy A53 and its predecessor from last year, the A52 5G. Again, pretty much the same cameras, I believe. So let me know what you thought about all the photos and videos you just saw. Is the A53 an upgrade as far as camera is concerned over the A52, or do you think they're about the same? Let me know which one you prefer in the comments. Also, if you have any other questions about these two phones that I can help answer, drop them in the comment as well. And as always, thanks for watching.